some of you probably remember and maybe recognize the language that Greg used in the Anonymous People. And instead of being a person in long-term recovery, instead of saying, "Hi, my name's Jason, I'm an alcoholic," or "My name's Jason, I'm an addict," that's the language I would use in a 12-step support meeting. I identify by my disease, and it helps to establish that remember where I'm at, what I'm there for, and to build the camaraderie amongst those that are working towards recovery and those that are in recovery. But when dealing with the public, when dealing with the general public, just a few small adjustments to our terminology really helps for folks to better understand what it is we're talking about. The lingo, the jargon, as some of us know of from our social work classes, the jargon associated with recovery in the 12-step realm is often misunderstood by the media and by outside folks that don't really understand what's going on. So when I say one day at a time, or one step at a time, or sometimes it's every day, day by day, 24 hours at a time, the average person could interpret that as being, well, I might just be drinking tomorrow, or I may have been drinking yesterday, that I might be using in the next 15 minutes, because it's like, well, sometimes you got to go 15 minutes at a time, and sometimes you got to go 5 minutes at a time. So you can see how that can be misinterpreted, and like a potential employer hears that, and they're thinking, well, this guy was drinking yesterday, so why should I give him the opportunity, or why should I? It just adds to the shame, adds to the stigma. So as Greg pointed out in the Anonymous People, I guess the agreed upon language is that, "Hi, my name is Jason Merrick, and I am a person in long-term recovery. And what that means for me is that I've been able to live without drugs and alcohol for over 6 years. That also has enabled me to be a social work student here at NKU. That has enabled me to be a friend, a brother, a son, and a productive, happy member of Northern Kentucky, a community that really has welcomed me open-armed. When I landed here in 2007, I was broke, homeless, completely addicted, broken, and really buying into that shame and that stigma. I just kind of hid. I was in hiding, and if you had asked me, I'd said, well, I deserve to just be abandoned and left for dead, basically. It wasn't until I went to a 12-step meeting in Erlanger, and they welcomed me. And I learned of a recovery center that had just opened called the Grateful Life Center over on the 3L Highway. The next morning I was there, and I went through an assessment process. And within 2 weeks I had a bed there. It was April 16th, 2009 when I checked into the Grateful Life Center, and I lived there for 13 months. It wasn't my first experience with treatment, and I'll back up a little bit, and I don't want to paint give you the entire checkered past or turn this into a lead or anything like that, but I will identify some certain points in my active addiction that are paramount in understanding this disease and understanding the solutions and addressing the shame and stigma that's often associated with addiction. So rewind back to in my 20s, and I had the opportunity to take a long road trip with my little brother, my stepmother, and my father from Columbus, Ohio to Northern California, where we were moving there. And I had been using every day for the better part of 10 years, since my late teens. I'd been using every single day, drinking constantly. I lived in an environment where it was totally acceptable to. I was in the restaurant business, right? I mean, any good alcoholic, when they don't know what they want to do with their life, they go and bartend or wait tables, and that's the places I was at, and the places I've seen throughout the country that's party central. People like to live like I like to live. So it wasn't a big deal to use every day, to drink every day. And I had plenty of friends and plenty of sources and plenty of resources to facilitate that. But when I went on this trip with my family, my 5-year-old little brother and my stepmother and my father, I couldn't do that. I couldn't use every day. I couldn't drink every day. And it was the first time that I experienced withdrawal symptoms. I got in the back seat of a Jeep Grand Cherokee with my 5-year-old brother, who I did not even know hardly at all, and went into withdrawal after the first 24 hours on the road. I can't remember what city we were in, but I just remember waking up in just cold sweats and violent convulsions and screaming profanities at this 5-year-old little boy next to me, that I was robbing him of a relationship. That's all he wanted, was to have a big brother and to have a relationship with me. But I was in no state. I could not handle, I couldn't be a family member, I couldn't be a friend, I couldn't be a brother. And this is important because I realized very quickly that I was not in control, that addiction was now making the decisions for me. And that goes back to the disease concept, that this is not a choice. This is not something I chose to do. There is a point in someone's use where it stops becoming a choice and it starts becoming a need, where you can no longer function without the use of some substance. And the scariest part is that you can't tell where that is. It was just one day. Generally you find out, like I did, way after the fact. It's way too late. And now my body needed these substances to function normally. And that, by definition, is a disease. So we ended up, I robbed and stole and cheated my way across the country with them, managing to use here and there. I lied to my dad and my stepmom and my little brother. My dad kind of knew what was going on, because some of us will probably remember that commercial where I learned it from you, Dad. I learned it by watching you. Do you remember that? Yeah, I'm surprised. You're young for that. But that was the case in my family. And my dad kind of knew what was up. So I wasn't fooling him, but my stepmom and my little brother, I had the flu, and I was just sick. And we made it out to Northern California, and I quickly attracted, I don't know how it was, I just found those people again, right? The same people that were in Columbus, the people who liked to party like I did, that used every day, most of them in physical addiction and not able to control their actions, and lived a lifestyle according to that, in hiding, basically, hiding up in the hills of Northern California, growing pot and using meth and drinking alcohol on a daily basis. And that's how I lived. I was quickly accepted into that group, and that's how I lived for the next decade, essentially in hiding, self-medicating, because of that shame, right? Because I didn't know there was treatment out there. I bought into the stigma, and I didn't know that this is not a socially acceptable condition. So I either have to completely hide what I'm doing, or I become the black sheep of the community, and I become that guy, right? Which I later did become anyway, because that's the progression of the disease. But so I quickly met a girl and fell in love, and what do they say about an alcoholic, right? When when they're on their second date, because the U-Haul van's in the driveway and they're moving in together, right? So that's the case, of course. And I convinced her to let me move in with her and her 2 daughters. They had a 10-acre ranch up this beautiful Black Bart Trail up in the country, 10 miles from any civilization. And I proceeded to turn their 10 acres into a giant marijuana farm, which I don't know if anyone's ever been to Northern California, but that is really part of the culture. It's wine, it's grapes, and it's marijuana. And that really is what these little towns thrive on. That's what drives their economy. And it is socially acceptable to be a marijuana farmer in that area. And in fact, they're highly regarded for bringing income into the economy, the local economy. So I wanted to be part of that group. But being out of control, an unmanaged disease, I couldn't handle it. So I managed to keep it together for a few years, a few seasons, and then it gradually started to fray and then completely dissolve right before my eyes. There was at one point I had scared Lisa, was my girlfriend's name, and her 2 daughters, Evangeline and Luna. I had scared them to the point where they had to leave from their own home. I drove them from their own home. and I was left to my devices up on the hill, we called it, to cultivate marijuana and use meth and drink daily. And had I been left there any much longer, I would have died on that hill. I had, at one point, and just to give you the gravity of the situation, I was so malnourished and sleep deprived, and that I was experiencing drug-induced hallucinations, auditory and visual hallucinations. I was living in a tree. I wasn't living in a house anymore. I had moved into the tree house up behind the house with a 20 gauge shotgun and multiple bottles of alcohol and drug paraphernalia. And I lived up there above the pot garden because I thought that people were going to try to rob me. So one day I had a moment, what we refer to as a moment of clarity, and I called Lisa and I told her that I had a problem with drugs and alcohol, just out of the blue. And I don't know why, I don't know. I can't figure it out, but I just did. It was just something it was weighing on my soul is what it was. It was just weighing on my heart and on my soul. And I needed to tell somebody. I needed to confess what I thought were my sins. And so I called her and I said, I have a problem with drugs and alcohol and I don't know what to do. And what I expected and what actually happened were so far apart that it's nothing short of a divine intervention, truly, because I expected to be escorted off the property immediately by the police and to prison, which I felt that I deserved, or worse. But what happened was that she came up there. She had confided in one of her mentors, and she's a highly educated graduate from Brown University, and fortunately for me, she understood what addiction was, what addiction is. And she came up there the next day and said 3 words to me that I will never forget. And I always try to use this level of empathy with anyone that I'm working with and anyone that I'm sort of mentoring to work with others. And that is, she said, Jason, come down from here and get the help that you deserve. And those 3 words are what literally broke down the barriers to treatment, to recovery for me. Get the help you deserved. I was somebody that had scared her and her daughters to the point where they had to move from their own home. I had run through not only their lives, but every other life that I had been around since I could remember. So that I deserved help was a very new concept for me. That was the farthest from my understanding at that point. But it was enough. It was enough to break down that wall. I could open up, and I can tell you that what happened after that was just a huge sigh. It was very difficult and I was very relieved. But again, I experienced withdrawal because we ended up driving into San Francisco to try out a 30-day rehab. And I had been up on this hill for the past months, not around any other human beings, left to my own devices. I got down in the city and I was like a deer in headlights. I couldn't stand the people, the traffic, the cars. It was too fast, and I was in withdrawal and just bugging out. So we turned around and we drove 100 miles the other direction to a little place in Humboldt County on the Eel River, right on 101 in the Redwood Grove, called Singing Trees Recovery Center. And I spent 28 days there. It introduced me to the world of 12-step recovery. It introduced me to the world of social work. And I'd love to say that it kept me sober, but obviously it didn't. I got out of there and I went back to the old people, places, and things, and I continued to use. And I experienced a lot of the things, a lot of the traps and the vices and the triggers that a lot of people claim to have experienced. I started making up different rules, like I'll only drink a certain type of liquor, or mine was I'll only drink in my truck, right? That's a great idea. I'll only drink when I'm driving because Lisa doesn't like my truck and she'll never get in there. So that was my logic, right? Brilliant, yeah. And again, so grateful that I never landed in prison or in jail because of that. So I'm starting to get off on a tangent here, and I didn't want to go into a big drunk-a-log, but I think it's important to really get into this stuff and understand that it was that level of empathy, education, understanding, compassion that Lisa had when she dressed me up on that hill on that summer night that allowed me the access to treatment. Is that, I mean, we think about providing treatment, and we think about building the buildings and making the beds, but that individual, you have to, when that opportunity to get that person into treatment exists, there's a whole nother level of barriers within the shame and the stigma and the discrimination. So those have to be addressed very delicately. So it's only with that, I believe that it's only with that level of understanding that we'll ever get anywhere in addressing the heroin situation in Northern Kentucky, throughout the state, and throughout the nation. So fast forward to where we started at the Grateful Life Center, and again, I met, I got in there on April 16, 2009, and I was introduced to teams of individuals who were dedicating their lives, dedicating their careers and their education to helping people like me getting a second chance, some getting a third and fourth, fifth chance. And I went to the assistant director and I said, so what do I do? What can I do to be of service at the level where you're at? And she said to me, Jason, you should do three things. You should first complete this program, then get a job in the field, and go to school, get an education. So that's exactly what I did. And I think what all of those spell out, and which I think is a crucial component to recovery and to when you're dealing with people seeking recovery, is that they're engaged and they have purpose in life. Without purpose in life, they're still left to that, well, I'm not worth it, I'm not valuable, I have no self-worth, my self-esteem, all of that just goes down the tubes. So developing faith, developing worth, developing a self-esteem is one of the very, very crucial elements of obtaining long-term recovery. I did that, and now I'm so grateful. The doors have just opened one after the other in levels of service that I never even knew were possible. Starting here at NKU, starting at the Grateful Life Center, coming here to NKU, helping men and women that are trying to get into recovery, coming here and just being engaged in the social work classes and meeting the faculty and students, and then being able to come back. And some of you, I've talked in some of your classes, and I'd never even thought that this guy. I mean, come on! I smoke methamphetamine and drink whiskey, and what am I doing here? And part of the philosophy in the 12-step modality is that your deepest, darkest secrets and deepest, darkest past starts to become your most valuable asset. And that really has happened in my life. Those stories and those experiences in my past that I used to be so ashamed of, and those were the reasons my head was in the sand. Now I can use those to empathize with folks that are going through some of the similar situations. So that brings us up to date, really, with the Heroin Impact Response Task Force, and being able to be a part of creating social welfare policy in our region, in an area that is really starved for progressive, forward-thinking programs that address harm reduction, that address advocacy and treatment and prevention. Being a part of that is a gift, and I wish that for everybody, not just people seeking recovery, but anybody, any citizen of a community, any member of a community, to be able to be engaged at that level is so exhilarating and so gratifying that everyone should, at some point, and I get that a lot. What can I do? What can we do? How can we help? And you monetarily, sure, everybody could give money, but really time and your own personal skill set, and figuring out what speaks to you, and working towards that, understanding it, doing some research, talking to people, even just a conversation with people about addiction breaks stigma, breaks discrimination, bringing it up, being willing to talk about it. That was what happened with all the past epidemics that we've overcome, AIDS, with cancer. I mean, I can remember when cancer was a 4-letter word. It wasn't that long ago. It was through conversations and awareness and advocacy and harm reduction that all became better funded and just more apparent to the research and the development of medications. And now people are living with it. Now people are not in hiding, and there are more people living with those conditions, those diseases, than are dying from it. And that's what we hope for with addiction. Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned the phrase divine intervention, and I'm wondering if that was just a phrase or if it means anything more to you.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, Ron, and I kind of left that part out. In academia, we tend to divert away from spirituality, right? Spirituality is a huge part of my life and of my recovery. It comes with relying on a power greater than myself, and I say that kind of generically because that's what we say in 12-step support networks, but it is truly the things that have happened in my life would not have happened because of my doing. There was an outside force at play there. Call it the universe, call it God, call it Buddha, call it whatever you want, but there was some sort of a creator or some sort of a divine entity that was guiding my path. I was presented options, and it was up to me to make a choice which way I would go, but the results were just beyond my wildest imaginations, really my wildest expectations. And that's where the divinity comes in. It also helps me with dealing with daily stressors. So a lot of things that people take for granted, that people are able to manage on a regular basis, I tend to have trouble with, and I think a lot of people like me have trouble with. Things that normally would drive me to the point where I would be so stressed out that I would try to escape and use and divert. So I say now that I can turn that over to the universe or God or a power greater than myself, and let that be sorted out by someone or something a lot smarter than me. So being able to have that kind of faith and see that actually work in my life is where God plays a part in my everyday activities. So, and I pray, I meditate, and those are all things that help with just self-actualization and managing stress and everything down to being able to sleep and just be happy and content. And so that's a whole another level. I could probably talk about the spirituality for another hour or two, but I do want to get on to we're going to talk about naloxone and needles as well, and I'll probably jump back and forth into spirituality and whatnot as they all come back to me. But I do have some very interesting stories. That sort of, go ahead.
Before you exit that conversation, I want you to remember what Jason has said about what brought him off the hill, and also the connection with spirituality. As we prepare for the conversation on prevention, because there's a lot of thought right now about the similarity between what happens in prevention and what happens in recovery. I was just reading last night, Jim Thaxton, the guy that spoke on Tuesday posted on our Facebook page last night the 10 tips the Pope had just issued for happy living, was it, or something? And number 6 was something that we've been talking about in prevention for a long time, and it's about giving young people dignified service or a role in the community. And that is so relevant to the recovery movement as well as in the prevention movement. So you're going to see when we get to that point, and we'll bring out some facts about resiliency that really relate to what Jason has spoken to tonight. So I just wanted to get you to plant that in your head.
Yeah, without gratitude, humility, and power greater than myself, I would not be as fulfilled, as happy, and as purposeful as I am today. That's for sure. Yeah, Carly?
I just wanted to share that I feel the same way with being a cancer survivor and some of the things I've had to go through in my life, because I say I would not be here, and I respect everybody's belief in whatever religion, but for me, I would not be here if it wasn't for the grace of God. And it was my faith that got me through some of the darkest hours of my life. So I can really relate to that.
Mhm.
And thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And I encourage everyone that has experiences to that level to share them, talk about them. It certainly helps to break down the stigma and, you know, come out of hiding. It's something to be proud of. It's a huge accomplishment. Why not? And I know I'm preaching to the choir. What did he say? I'm preaching to the choir, but if the choir doesn't sing, then who will, right?
That kind of got me to where I am today because when I was dealing with my son who suffered from addiction, all of a sudden God just said, go to school. Go to school. If you help one family not have to deal with what you have. And I'm like, I've been out of school for 34 years, you know, and it just kept on me and kept on me. And finally I said, okay, and here I am. But like you said, there's many times that I couldn't have got through the day if it wasn't for my spirituality. Let's put it that way.
Thank you.
It's going to be a big problem. They got to have this happen all the time.
Yeah. So two of the strategies that we've introduced in Northern Kentucky recently for in regards to harm reduction are naloxone and the prevention of overdose and morbidity associated with opioid use and accidental overdose, accidental death, morbidity. And we're working on syringe access. Syringe exchanges are here primarily to reduce the spread of bloodborne pathogens, hepatitis C and HIV. We're all, I'm sure, familiar with what happened in Scott County, Indiana. The outbreak, it started out as 22 new cases of HIV solely from the spread or from the use of sharing of needles. A group of people in that community were shooting up what was it called? Opana, a very powerful opioid. And that quickly grew to well over 160 new cases of HIV. 90% of those are comorbid with hepatitis C, meaning that they got both hepatitis C and HIV. What that translates to into healthcare costs for that community is over $150 million in a community that has about 4,500 people. And well beyond their capability of managing. So obviously the CDC, Center for Disease Control, came in, the Chicago Recovery Alliance, Any Positive Change, all converged on Scott County, Indiana to address the issue and to begin an emergency syringe access program, giving people access to sterile injection supplies, testing for hepatitis C, HIV, and connecting them with appropriate treatment for those pathogens, for those diseases. Some less obvious occurrences that happen in syringe access programs are people get tied into the care, right? They get engaged in the healthcare system. And these are people that, like me, in Northern California, are hiding. They're hiding. They're they're out in the country. They're not showing their face at any doctor's office or any hospital unless it's like a car wreck or they're forced to go there. They're not signing up for the Affordable Care Act, and they're not signing up on their employer's insurance programs. There's high poverty and high homelessness and high joblessness. So these are people that are normally not engaged in any kind of these systems. So that's something that no other project, no other program can accomplish, is engaging these people who are at these high risk populations into the systems of care that they're so in such dire need of. Also providing access to the, housing and job services and support networks and detox and treatment. And I was at one in East Coast community there was a woman in there doing nails and cutting hair for homeless people that were going for job interviews. So they'd come in there, and it was just an overall very welcoming, very nurturing environment. And in these, I'm going to use an example of the Atlanta Harm Reduction Coalition, because these centers, these programs, these projects, you basically implement them in your worst case scenarios, in the neighborhoods that are otherwise condemned. You put them into your worst communities, and they act as the hub of healing. People gain access to services. Next thing you know, the community is more healthy, poverty goes down, joblessness goes down, and people become more engaged and live happier, more productive, longer lives. So Atlanta Harm Reduction Coalition, they've been doing it for 10 years. And I forget the name of the neighborhood, but it's the ghetto, right? It's just straight up ghetto in Atlanta. And slowly, over the last 10 years, the area has become more and more gentrified. The community's become more and more healthy. The money comes in. And all of a sudden, they're sitting there. They're next door to a Starbucks, and they're putting in a brand new stadium down the street. And they're like, what are we doing here? We're out of our wheelhouse now. Our job is done here. And it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's a bittersweet pill because they have to move, but their job is essentially done in that community. Now they can move on to another part of town that is less fortunate and where their services are more needed. There's a couple, I wish this thing was on, there's a couple different approaches to syringe access. There are many programs throughout the country that are considered underground, where they're in states or cities that don't allow them legally to occur. And a lot of them just sort of turn their head, look the other way. The law enforcement and politicians, bless you.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you.
They turn their head, they look the other way because they understand the impact that these programs are having on these populations. And it's very important to build a relationship with law enforcement and with your lawmakers, whether that be Republican or Democrat, because the evidence really does speak for itself. And it depends on the kind of crowd that you're around as to what sort of selling points you want to talk about. But public health, the implications for public health are just amazing, right? You're talking about a condition that if I were to have hepatitis C, it would cost about $100,000 out of taxpayer money, because if I didn't have insurance and I couldn't pay for it, taxpayers would end up paying the bill, about $100,000 for my lifetime of treatment of hepatitis C. If I had HIV, we're talking almost $600,000 for a lifetime of treatment for me with HIV. So that's all incurred by the taxpayer. All that can be prevented with one 11-cent syringe. And it's it's such a gross contrast. It's almost unbelievable, right, that you could do that much good with that little money. You prevent one case of hepatitis C, and you're funding a very comprehensive syringe access program for an entire year. Well-staffed, well-stocked, ready to go. And so if you're talking to small business owners, talking to politicians, the fiscal side of it all is kind of one of the greatest selling points. Another selling point with law enforcement is that it reduces the likelihood of them incurring an accidental needle stick while on duty. 1 in 3 officers will get stuck by a needle at some point in their career. 28% of them will get hepatitis C or HIV from that stick if there is not a needle exchange. What happens when they put a needle exchange in communities? That goes down by 66%. So a significant reduction in accidental needle sticks among law enforcement happen when there's a syringe access program. Why? Because it gets needles out of our communities. It gets them off the streets, it gets them out of the parks, it gets them, and it's educating drug users on how to dispose of these syringes. There are a couple different kinds of syringe access programs. Sometimes it's a one-for-one exchange. So you have to bring a needle in to get a needle. Those aren't the best practice. No, keep in mind, I'll go back to that. So those are not the best practice programs out there. The best practice is unlimited access. And I'm sure you can already imagine the controversy surrounding, especially in Northern Kentucky, giving an intravenous drug user as many syringes as they could possibly want or more. right? So what do you think? What is like your initial reaction as when I say I'm going to give an intravenous drug user 1,000 syringes to go out and use drugs with?
It's gonna open up an invitation for them to go do it.
To go do it? Yeah?
Even more.
Okay. Do you think they're going to do it without the syringe? Even if I don't give them the syringes, do you think they're going to do it?
Yeah, they're gonna.
They're going to do it no matter what. So that's kind of how I open that conversation. I'm like, well, we know a couple things about drug users in Northern Kentucky. The first one is they're going to use no matter what. They're going to use, they're going to share, they're going to use old needles, they're going to use dirty needles they find on the street, they're going to use your needle, they're going to use my needle, it doesn't matter, right? It's obvious. That's what's happening now. And they're spreading hepatitis C and HIV. Up to the point where 80% of our intravenous drug users are Hep C positive in Northern Kentucky. And those are just the ones we know of, 80%. Right? So every time law enforcement or we see a syringe in that park, it is very likely that that syringe is infected with Hep C or even HIV. And you think in Scott County, Indiana, and I apologize for jumping around, but in Scott County, Indiana, when CNN rolls up and the CDC pulls in, I mean, do you think they're just like, hey, coming out to talk to them and saying, hey, how you doing? Yeah, I'm an intravenous drug user. No, they're scattered. They're gone. They're moving. They're out of there. They're moving further into Indiana. They're moving further into Indiana. They're moving to Kentucky. They're moving to Missouri. They're getting out of there. So I guarantee that some of that community that slipped through the fingers of the CDC and the testing are already in our communities. They're already moved to Louisville. They're already moved to Northern Kentucky. So the answer to maybe a logical progression of thought for your concern would be to provide them with a one-for-one exchange, right? They got to bring a needle in to get a needle. That sounds logical, right? Sounds like maybe it would create a value for that discarded syringe. They would be less likely to throw it out the window, right? Mm-hmm. What do you think could be some issues that could occur because of that, though?
Well, I'm kind of in agreement with giving them as many as they want.
Okay, good.
If you just give them the one, they're going to turn right around and need another one, and then there's no reduction there. They're basically going to go back to the street, they're going to share needles, they're going to keep continuing to do what they're doing.
Exactly. That's exactly right. They're
likely to continue to share that needle that they've exchanged it for with 10 other people.
Mm-hmm. We've got a group, say the three of us, we're shooting up and we're all sharing the same needle. And I'm like, okay, I'll go to the syringe exchange and I'll get us a clean needle. I go in, I get one clean needle, and we're still sharing the same needle, right? Where's the reduction? Like Harley said, there's none. There is none. So there could possibly be even punitive concerns, punitive damages. If a syringe authority figure is knowingly giving me a one-for-one syringe and knows that one of us has Hep C or HIV and knows that we're just going to go back and share that same syringe, then they're contributing to the spread of hepatitis C and HIV, and there's possibly some serious consequences to that. Absolutely. Yeah, especially like a health department or an organization that is designed to protect the well-being of a community.
They're looking at a lawsuit.
Yeah, absolutely. There you go. Yeah. So that is why one-for-one exchange, very basically, is not a best practice.
Isn't that how the Cincinnati exchange works?
It is. Unfortunately, it is. And they are bound by their policies and procedures and their funders. And I don't want to say law because Ohio is not a state that legally allows for syringe exchange, but there's just a common understanding. It started in Cleveland, and the municipality and law enforcement just sort of turns a blind eye and lets it occur, understands that it's being operated up to the utmost standards, and they're providing all the services that would protect the public, except for that one-for-one. And I can't say with any validity, but I know the folks that run it, and I have a feeling that if there was someone that came up and said, I don't have a needle, then I don't think that they would be leaving there without getting what they need to prevent the spread of hepatitis C or HIV.
I just heard today, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay.
I just heard today that Ohio has their blood-borne pathogen
All right.
prevention for
Okay.
It was the only bill that the governor actually didn't veto.
All right.
So there is a that
Good deal.
allows not a needle exchange, but these prevention programs will let one that.
Right. Wonderful.
What, but Kentucky does the multiple, there.
Right.
Kentucky does the
So,
multiple syringes.
what it comes down
Ohio
to-
just does the one-on-one.
Well, apparently that might be different now for Ohio. So I don't want to give any misinformation. So I believe that Ohio will be providing the best possible route of disease prevention. But I don't know exactly what that is. So it could be one for one, but it most likely is not. Most likely it's unlimited access.
They need to, because of what we talked about the other night. We're so close, we're just right across the river, and you've got people who are friends with, or family members are in Ohio, they're gonna come over and share those needles in Kentucky and vice versa, and, you know, we really need to work hand in hand, I think, with Ohio.
Absolutely.
So,
Yep. And in fact, 40% of their clients are from Kentucky.
yeah, that's what you
That-
said.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, in reality, because we have two health districts in northern Kentucky, and the southern one is in rural, covers 4 rural counties, and the northern Kentucky covers the top 4. Because we are conservative and in the Midwest, we are likely to start out with what the law states that we can do, which is just a one-on-one exchange. But the intent, I think, is over time and very quickly to do to what the logic tells us is the best way to go.
Well, Louisville is not doing one for one. It all comes down. It comes down to the like very simple language in the legislation, and the attorney, our Attorney General Jack Conway, has evaluated the language, and there's one. It really comes down to one word, and it's allow. It allows that's the word that permits us to do any kind of modality. So Louisville has given out 1,300 syringes. They've collected 130, and so our senators and our representatives are very concerned about that, and they're building a case saying, well, you're giving out more than you're taking in, but logically, it should be that way because there's obviously not enough syringes out there because people are sharing. So at first, you're going to see an influx in syringes in the community. But if we look at our neighboring states and if we look at the most successful syringe exchange programs in the nation, they are unlimited access and they collect more than they give out because they dedicate so much time and resources to collection. It's an entire different, that's a whole different program. Collection and cleanup. They have groups of volunteers. They have whole organizations that are solely dedicated to syringe cleanup. They go to the hot spots and they place containers where, like, I mean, you could think of probably a couple hot spots in our communities. I can think of one under a bridge in this county, actually, under a freeway bridge where I know that there's a lot of drug users that hang out. Eric, there's cookies. No? Okay.
Well, shouldn't there be a corresponding reduction in blood-borne diseases?
Yes. Yes, and that's the goal, right? That's the goal. The goal is to reduce the spread of hepatitis C and HIV.
Well, has that been the case?
In Louisville, it's not. It's a little too soon to tell on that. In that case, it will happen. But in every other community that has implemented syringe access, absolutely across the board, unanimously, all see a reduction in the spread of hepatitis C and HIV, almost to the point where it's non-existent.
Did Louisville just start theirs like after that bill passed?
Yep. Yeah, they're almost a month, just about a month.
Yeah, that bill passed like about a month ago?
It passed on March 25th.
Yeah, several months
And
ago.
then, so it took a couple months for the health departments to build the program, get their policies. What has to happen in Kentucky is that the municipality has to agree, the county has to agree, and the health department all have to be on the same page. So in Jefferson County, in Louisville, they are all under the same roof. It's all the same building. The city, the county, and the health department are all on the same building. So it was easy for them to get it going really quickly. It was like one meeting and one approval, and they were ready to go. Fayette County is the same way, Lexington. So they're going to be up and running if they're not up and running already. So one of the points that I think is important about harm reduction, and we kind of touched on it earlier with the guardrail analogy, is that sometimes drug users don't want to quit using drugs. And that doesn't mean that they don't deserve any less of a life or any less care, or it's that shame and the stigma that is associated with it that really we want to eliminate. So sometimes treatment isn't the best option. Sometimes, and keep in mind that that's a hard pill to swallow. We want to say that we want to get everybody to get help, we want everybody to get treatment, but some people like to use drugs. And the goal of harm reduction is to reduce the harms to other people, including the ones that are using drugs. It's for everybody. So a lot of times that's kind of that's sort of misinterpreted, that harm reduction is just a way to get people into treatment. And not that very much is true, but that's not all. We also want to protect the rights of those people that continue to use drugs. And this isn't my PowerPoint. Yeah. And I've kind of I'm going to have to go into the naloxone one. Does anyone have any questions about syringe access or syringe exchange? I want to just say a couple more things about hepatitis and HIV. So just for safety purposes, we do law enforcement training, and one of the ways we can reduce harms associated with intravenous drug use is to protect our law enforcement. They're on the front lines, and they're exposed to these discarded syringes. They're searching people, they're searching vehicles, they're searching homes, and we want to protect them. They're out there protecting our communities, protecting us from harm. So what we have done through the Heroin Impact Response Task Force and through People Advocating Recovery is we've developed a heroin safety training for law enforcement. And we provide them with an hour training, 40-minute hour training. We provide them with the sharps resistant gloves that Jim showed you guys on Tuesday. And we give them sharps containers for their cruisers. And we provide them with up to 4 naloxone kits if their department decides that they're allowed to carry them and they want to use them. So what we talk about are the risks, or the risk associated with hepatitis C and HIV. Some of the less obvious forms, the ways you can get this stuff, everybody thinks that that's that orange-capped needle, right? You think, oh, well, look out for the orange-capped needle. You don't think really so much about the cookers and the cottons and the tourniquets and the lighters and the little bottle of water that might be in the console of the vehicle, a little bottle cap that would just have a little tiny bit of water in it. That seems pretty harmless, right? You wouldn't think that you could get hepatitis C from that. But that's not necessarily true. Anything that comes into contact with that syringe, and I'll just pass this around. These little green things are actual cookers that come from syringe exchange programs. Sometimes people use a spoon. They'll use a spoon, they'll use a cigarette butt as a filter. There's little cotton balls, little tiny cotton pellets that you'll see in there. So basically, what will happen is a drug user will take one of these cookers.
You're going to have to explain this, especially
Yeah.
from someone who's never even seen it,
I
knows
will.
what these words are.
I will. So this is in lieu of a spoon, right? It looks like a little frying pan. Can you guys see that?
No.
Yeah? You see it, Ron? I'll pass it around.
And what's that called?
This would be a cooker.
So what is it in reality?
This is designed for drug use.
Where do you go to buy something like that?
This comes from a company called Total Access. They're a syringe exchange supplier. They specifically supplied injection supplies to syringe exchanges throughout the world. They're called Total Access Group, and they're out of Anaheim, California.
So that's specifically for
For
heroin.
injecting drugs. Not necessarily heroin. It could be cocaine or pills or...
So injecting things that are illegal.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
The issue is the blood, so if they're using a needle to get it into the system, then.
Yeah. And primarily illegal substance use.
Okay.
Yeah. So what we do is we take a little piece of heroin and we put it, or a ground up pill, or or a liquid. If it was you wouldn't necessarily need to put a liquid in here, but if it was any sort of a solid and you wanted to convert it to a liquid, to an injectable state, you would put it in here, you'd put a little bit of water in it, and then you would take one of these, you would take a lighter under it, you'd heat it up, you'd stir it up so it would dissolve into the liquid, and then you take one of these little cotton pellets. Sometimes you'd use a cigarette butt filter, half of a cigarette butt filter, a big cotton ball. and you drop that in there, and then you would take one of the syringes, and you would rest the tip of the needle on the cotton ball, and you draw all the liquid up through the cotton ball, filtering out any sediment that might be in there. And then you've got a shot that would be ready to go, ready to inject. Now, the point is that every single one of these things can carry hepatitis C for up to 5 weeks after the injection. 5 weeks. So we're talking a perfect petri dish type setting, you know, maybe under a car seat, in between, under a car mat, in between a cushion on a couch where it's moist, damp, warm, and hepatitis C will live on any of these for up to 5 weeks.
And that's called a cooker?
Yeah, cooker.
Wouldn't it be illegal for this company to sell these?
Well, syringe exchange programs operate in 30 states, and there's over 200 programs throughout the country. So, in more states than it's illegal, they're alive and thriving.
So basically, unless there's a person has access to a needle exchange program where they can get these pretty little green cups, they use a spoon or
They use a spoon.
something else.
And it's kind of tricky, but this stuff isn't against the law. It's just a little piece of aluminum. It's a little cotton pellet.
Right.
It's only illegal when you put a piece of heroin in there or a ground up pill that you got illegal.
So then, the user would just take little pieces of cotton, like a cotton ball, and pull it apart to get the little cottons?
Uh-huh.
And then the heroin is in the hard form and could be in the liquid form when they.
And a heroin that would be in a liquid form would be like pharmaceutical grade morphine, and most drug users aren't going to be coming across that in northern Kentucky. But if they did, they wouldn't have to use any of this. That they would just draw right out of the vial into a syringe.
Right. So if say, I'm just using myself an example, if I were to go and buy heroin, it would be in the powder form.
It would be typically in northern Kentucky we see a chunk. It's like a brown chunk. It looks kind of like dog food, and that's a slang that's used.
I
You
learned
got
that,
any
yes.
dog? They call it dog. You'll go into over the Rhine and you'll hear people going row row, and those
Yeah,
are the
we
dope
learned
boys.
that,
That's their call, and they're trying
We
to.
saw a picture of it. I remember we saw a picture of it and stuff, which was very helpful in my education and learning.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean,
I've
I
got
don't
I've
need
got
a-
some pictures of it.
If you're
I hope
not
this isn't a
exposed
trigger.
to
Is this
them.
okay? Good. We're gonna go to a meeting after this.
I even lived in over the Rhine for years
All right.
after I was in recovery.
Those are the injection supplies that you would get at a syringe exchange program. And there's even more with this kit that I've put together because it's got naloxone in it. It's got intramuscular syringes to inject the naloxone, and it's also got injection supplies. So you've got part of the kit that's an overdose kit, and you've got part of the kit that's a dose kit. So this is sort of the all-inclusive dose and overdose kit. You can get one of those to use drugs safely with, and you can also reverse an overdose with this as well.
Okay, so if they went to a needle exchange program that had, get however many you want, they would maybe get one of those packets and then the syringes separate?
So they go to, say, the People's Harm Reduction in Seattle.
Okay.
They give out 4.5 million syringes a year. Huge, right? They're helping tons of people. They're preventing tons of diseases. That's the community that has almost no spread, no HIV, no Hep C. You'll go in there and you'll say, I could probably go use 20 syringes, and they'll say, how about 200? And they'll give you a box. It comes in a box about like that. They'll give you 200 syringes, all the cottons and all the cookers you can carry, and then they'll give you a case of sharps containers, and they'll say, help your friends out. Give them to your friends. And then you're all of a sudden, you're a distribution point to your friends and your circle of people, and you've got the containers to dispose of them. And me, as an employee or an outreach worker, would say, I want to come back in a month or come back in a week whenever you're done and bring me those sharps containers and I'll get you more. Or I'll come to you. I'll come out and see you if you want. If you feel comfortable with that, I'll come to your house. I'll pick up all these dirty syringes and I'll bring the new ones. And then all of a sudden now I've got an outreach worker that is engaged in the community, that's a peer, an intravenous drug user that has lots of intravenous drug using friends. So that is how you develop that relationship with a high-risk population, and you get them engaged in the process. You get them engaged in the program. That's how it's replicated all over with underground syringe exchange programs, with above-ground syringe exchange programs, and I hope that's what we work towards in Northern Kentucky, in Louisville, and Lexington. Is really, that's the only way you can really develop that trust and that, you know, that relationship with the drug-using community, because they're going to be in hiding.
See, now, because I remember seeing on TV how, because I knew it was liquid and powder form, and I remember on TV seeing where they use the spoon and then they do the lighter to turn it, you know. But with the crystal meth, that is like now the cocaine is powdered, crack is where the cocaine is turned into liquid, correct? What?
Crack is a tough one to turn to liquid because you have to use citric acid to change crack back into.
Isn't that like cocaine?
It is.
Yeah.
Cocaine is manipulated with
Lemon juice.
yeah, with lemon juice and water and heat, and it's turned into a rock, and then it can be changed back into a liquid to inject as well. Let's go straight into, I've got them combined. What is Narcan and what is an overdose? So what happens when an individual ingests opiates is the opiates themselves bond to the receptors in the brain that control the central nervous system and your breathing. So if a person goes into overdose, they are essentially going into respiratory arrest. Their lungs shut down, they stop breathing. Very soon after that, cardiac arrest occurs because of the lack of oxygen, and then coma, and then death. What naloxone does is that it kicks that opioid out of the receptor and replaces it temporarily with an antagonist, that is naloxone. It's temporary, it lasts for 30 to 90 minutes, but it's very effective at restoring breathing and essentially reversing the potentially fatal situation. So we'll focus in on our CPR dummy here. I never quite got a name down for him yet. Has anybody got a name? Andy, I know, is pretty generic. We'll just go with Andy. We'll focus on Andy. So you come across somebody who is obviously in some form of distress. You might see things like blue lips, very clammy skin, very sweaty. The palms, the fingernails, most people in a crisis situation aren't going to take the time to press on their fingernails, but if you did, you would see that it would not turn quickly back to pink. It would go to white and it would stay white, meaning that the circulation is slowing down, that there's no breathing. You might hear things like a gurgling sound, a death rattle happening there. And obviously in some kind of distress. It's a very different situation from somebody who's just really high, really intoxicated. If they're really intoxicated, you'll see things like maybe a little bit of drooling, maybe slumped over, but generally they will respond to some kind of stimulation if they're just really high. What you're going to want to do is apply light stimulation very intuitively to say, hey, what's going on with you? Are you okay? What's up? Maybe a slap on the cheek. You can do what's called a sternum rub, where you take a fist like this with your knuckles pointed out, and you kind of dig it right into that sternum bone right there. It's painful. That hurts. If they're able to respond to that, they will. They'll wake up. They'll say, hey, what's going on? Stop. If that happens, then just keep a close eye on them, making sure that they don't eventually slip into overdose. Overdose can occur up to 3 hours after an injection. So just because someone doesn't go into not an overdose right then doesn't mean that they can't be in overdose at a later time. So if they do not respond to that stimuli, you give them that sternum rub and they don't respond to that, the first thing you're going to want to do is get out your phone and call 911. Notify first responders that you suspect an overdose is occurring to please send help right away. Give a clear address, give a clear cross street. Make sure that they know where you're at, that they're on their way. And it's crucial that you say overdose. You tell them that an overdose is occurring, because now we have a Good Samaritan law in Kentucky that will give immunity for this person from arrest, from a prosecution, immunity for you. If you're using too, if I'm using and my friend's using, he overdoses, and I don't want to get arrested, I don't want him to get arrested, I call 911, I say, look, my friend's overdosing, please send help. If you don't say they're overdosing, then you set yourself up for possible prosecution. So you have to identify that it is an overdose, and you have to stay with the individual the entire time. And we hear a lot about people being dropped off, people being pushed out of cars, people being left in bathrooms, left at the gas station, or using alone in an empty bathroom. I'd like to believe that that's happening mostly because people are scared and they don't know what to do and they're afraid of arrest. So we create things like these Good Samaritan provisions to decrease that hesitation, to eliminate that hesitation of calling 911, knowing that you won't get in trouble for calling and doing the right thing and saving this person's life. Also, there are certain things that you can do to help this person stay alive until help gets there. Even if you don't have naloxone, if you don't have one of these blue bags, then you can breathe for them. By calling 911 and performing rescue breathing, you can keep them alive long enough for help to get there. So what happens now? We have established that they are in fact unconscious, that they are not responsive. We gave them that sternum rub. They didn't wake up. We got on the phone. We called 911. We notified first responders they're on the way. Now what we want to do is just the rescue breathing. We don't want to go into a full CPR. In a situation like this, you're probably going to see the heart is pounding like crazy. Their veins are jumping out of their neck. They're sweaty because the heart is trying to extract the oxygen from the blood that's not there because they're not breathing. So the blood is oxygen starved. The heart is working double time trying to get that remaining oxygen out of the blood. There's no reason for chest compressions when the heart's still beating. We just want to get oxygen into that blood so their brain will function, so they won't go into cardiac arrest, they won't go into a coma, and they won't die. So to do that, we clear the airway. We want to make sure there's nothing in their mouth, no gum or patches or pills or anything like that. We'll tilt their head back. What that does is it opens up the airway. It just makes it for less resistance for that air to travel from their mouth and into their lungs. We'll pinch their nose. Some of you are probably CPR trained. Some of you understand this process, right? So you pinch their nose and you give two initial breaths. And watching the chest rise out of the corner of your eye, you want to see that chest rise both times. And in each kit, you're going to find a CPR shield. And this will protect you from any bloodborne or bodily fluid-borne pathogens, illness, the cold, the flu, whatever. This is going to protect you from it. It's got this little one-way valve. This can go in their mouth, and their teeth could bite right down on that to be fine. And this would just, if they started throwing up or spitting up or coughing, it wouldn't go into your mouth. It would protect you. This just goes right down in there. Lay it over their face, tilt their head back, pinch their nose, and you give them 2 breaths, watching their chest rise both times. You want to try to do that at least once every 5 seconds, at least 1 breath every 5 seconds throughout this whole process. So it is very important that you identify, say, hey, can you help me? I got somebody overdosing here. Will you go get the naloxone, and I'll start the rescue breathing. And then you come with the kit, and then you switch. You start doing the breathing, and I start putting the kit together. I pull out, there's 2 doses of naloxone in each kit. Why? Because it might take 2 doses to get them out, and this stuff only works for about half an hour, so it might take 2 doses to keep them breathing until help gets there. So I pull out these boxes, I pop one open, and inside I'm going to find these 2 things right here. This is the liquid medication, this is the delivery apparatus. You'll see that there are caps. There's 3 caps. There's one here, and there's one here. They all just pop right off. You can pop them off with your thumb, you can pull them off with 2 fingers, whatever you got to do. You get all 3 caps off. You'll also find in the kit,
I'm going to sit a little closer so I can see.
yeah, and I'll pass this around so you can play with it too. Attached to the box or in the bag itself is this little bag too. And in that bag you'll see there's a little foam cone. So you'll take that foam cone and that screws on the short end. The medication screws on the large end, and you're going to have a device that looks exactly like this when you're ready to go. Liquid medication, the delivery syringe, and the atomizer. This little thing disperses the liquid into a mist. It comes out in a very fine mist. It's absorbed through the capillaries in the nasal cavity. It's a nasal spray. There's no injection. There's no needles involved. Very simple, very easy to use. You just come over, you tilt their head back, you squirt half up one side and half up the other. That's simple. It's an injection. It just plunges right down just like that. Comes out that end. Sometimes this thing might break, it flies off, goes down the vent, out the window. Still use it just like that, just without it. Just comes out in a long stream instead of a mist. Just same thing. If you look down, you see that you're like, oh my God, there's white powder, there's stuff caked in their nostrils all over like that. If that occurs, then you want to just shoot it all up one nostril because the liquid has a better chance of penetrating that membrane of the caking of the powder or whatever if you just put it all up one side. So you just inject it all up one side. After you do that, you set that, just set that aside and you go right back to rescue breathing. Keep breathing for them until they're able to breathe on their own. Right? This could take up to 2 minutes for the medication to take effect. If 2 minutes goes by and they're not breathing and help hasn't shown up yet, you get that second box. 2 minutes, 2 doses. You get out the second box, you do the same thing again. If for any reason you have to leave them for anything, you got to answer the door because the paramedics are there. The door might be 3 feet away, but you want to make sure that you turn them on their side. They've got to be in the recovery position. Why? So they won't aspirate, right. This induces immediate withdrawal symptoms, immediate. They're going to go right into withdrawal. They're going to be nauseous. They might be violent. At the very least, they're going to be disoriented, confused. They're not going to know what's going on. They're not going to know that they just were dead and that you just brought them out. So when they do start breathing on their own and they regain consciousness, you want to just explain to them, keep them calm, give them a little space. They could come out of this swinging, it happens, but they're alive. They're going to be angry. They might be a little upset. They're going to be not feeling very good, but explaining to them, hey, you just overdosed. We brought you back with Narcan. Just chill, just stay cool, stay calm. They can't let them use any more dope, no more drugs. The first thing they're going to want to do, first thing I would want to do is get more in me because I'm feeling terrible and I know the only thing that's going to make me feel better is another shot or another pill or another fix. But what happens if they do that is absolutely nothing happens. It just builds up in their brain. They don't get high, they don't get any relief because those receptors are being blocked temporarily. It builds up in their brain, just keeps building up until the medication wears off, and then it hits them like a ton of bricks, and they go right back into overdose. So there's a window of risk there. It's very important that they do not ingest any more substances. So what do we do? Go ahead.
Finish the demonstration.
What do we do? The 3 steps to responding effectively to an overdose? Call 911, rescue breathing, and give Narcan. That's simple. It's meant to be a very low threshold training. It's meant to be about a 15-minute training for anyone to effectively respond to an overdose. I am happy and sad to say that I have trained teenagers on how to use this because sometimes they're the only sober ones in the household. Mom and dad, brothers and sisters, uncles and aunts are all using, and they're the only ones that could manage to facilitate this. So I encourage all of you to look online, search nasal Narcan, check out one of the YouTube videos because it really does gives great demonstrations on how a relatively small person can maneuver a very large person over into the rescue position, move them from maybe a kitchen table or a couch onto a workable position with very little ease, without damaging them, protecting their head, protecting them from any harm. And there's all kinds of great work that's being done out there on trainings. And so in your kit, you'll find also detailed illustrated instructions, right? This is a lot of information. You've got like 50 packets and paperwork and everything else. So know with comfort that in each of your kits, there is a detailed illustrated instructions on exactly what to do. Everything that I've gone over in this training is in this trifold brochure, and it'll be in the little blue bag. So if an overdose occurs and you're like, oh my God, I got to get on YouTube or I got to find it. No, you just got to open it up and pull this out and look at the picture. It's 1, 2, 3, and then look at the picture, how to put it together. It tells you everything, what to do after, what to do before, what to look for, the warning signs. It even has some things on, I think it even has some things on how to prevent overdose. Never use alone. Have Narcan on hand. Keep doors unlocked if you are using alone. Don't want to be behind any locked doors. Often it's recommended that injectors test a little bit. Don't shoot up a whole big old bunch at once because you don't know what it's being cut with. Give a little tester so you know the potency, so you know how it makes you feel. You can get a feel for it, and then you're less likely to overdose on one big shot. This medication is non-toxic, meaning that as long as you're not on opiates, it will do nothing. It has no potential for abuse. It's not addictive. It does not. It has very, very few reactions result in a seizure, and those are mostly because of a polysubstance use. So if somebody's on like a huge amount of crack cocaine or methamphetamine, and they're trying to level out with heroin to maybe sort of have some kind of stability. You take away that heroin, and all you've got is a stimulant. It could induce like a rapid withdrawal and cardiac arrest, or perhaps a seizure. Very, very rare instances. But every paramedic and every doctor I've ever talked to, they're like, I can deal with a heart attack. I can work with a seizure, but it's very difficult to work on a dead person, right? So that's my training.